This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast, episode 33. This week, we honor the year 1995, along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1995. We also look at the case for putting Steve Winwood into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. And our museum is the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This podcast celebrates those who have been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We'll also look at the case for certain artists to be inducted into the Hall who aren't there yet. Plus, every week we'll discuss a different musical Hall of Fame, Walk of Fame, or museum and celebrate someone who's been inducted into them. Let's start with our main focus of the podcast, which is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Hall Foundation was established on April 20th, 1983. Former Atlantic Records chairman Ahmet Ertegun was the head of the foundation at the time. 3 years later, a committee chose Cleveland, Ohio to be the site of the physical location for the museum over Detroit, Michigan, New York City, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Memphis, Tennessee, and Cincinnati, Ohio. I say physical location because members have actually been inducted into the hall since 1986, before the building was even opened. Cleveland was chosen because of what DJ Alan Freed did to promote rock and roll, including mainstreaming the phrase rock and roll, which was originally black slang for sex, and for also holding the first rock and roll concert. Ground was broken for the building on June 7, 1993. It opened on September 1, 1995 at 1100 Rock and Roll Boulevard on the shore of Lake Erie. The hall gets over 400,000 visitors a year on average. Normal hours of operation are between 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. except for Thursdays when they're open until 9 p.m. They are normally open later in the summer months. General admission at the moment is $30. Children 6 through 12 are $20. College students, first responders, military members, and Northeast Ohio residents are $25, and kids 5 and under, Hall of Fame members, and Cleveland residents are free. ID is required to get the discounts. Rockhall.com is their website. That's rockhall.com. And as with all places these days due to COVID restrictions, check with the website for updated information and hours. The year was 1995. The U.S. inflation rate was at 2.81%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average at the end of the year was 5,117. Interest rates were 8.50% at the end of the year. The average cost of a home was $113,150. The average income per year was $35,900. Average monthly rent at the time was $550. A gallon of gas was only $1.09, and stamps cost 32 cents, with the average cost of a new car being $15,500. Bill Clinton was president of the United States at that time. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, angry at the U.S. government concerning the federal raid in Waco, Texas against the Branch Davidian compound in 1993, detonated a truck bomb in front of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, killing 168 people, including 19 children, in an act of domestic terrorism. In another act of domestic terrorism, a religious cult released sarin gas into a subway system in Tokyo, killing 13 people, with over 5,000 people being sent to the hospital. After occupying the pop culture domain for a couple of years, the original O.J. Simpson murder trial ended with a not guilty verdict. He would later be convicted in a civil trial and would spend years in jail for robbery and assault a few years later. An earthquake in Russia killed 2,000 people. A 7.3 earthquake in Kobe, Japan killed 6,433 people. A heat wave in the Midwestern United States killed over 3,000 people. In Chicago, the heat wave killed over 750 people as temperatures hit over 104 degrees for 5 straight days. The Ebola virus killed 244 people in Zaire, Africa. A volcano almost wiped out the island of Montserrat. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a far right-wing Israeli. Quebec held a referendum on independence from Canada. It was narrowly defeated. A peace treaty was reached between Bosnia, Serbia, and Croatia, but not before Bosnian Serbs gained control of Srebrenica and killed over 7,000 Muslim men and raped hundreds of Muslim women. Steve Fawcett became the first man to fly across the Pacific Ocean in a hot air balloon. A stock securities broker for the Baring Bank investment firm lost $1.4 billion speculating on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, which led to the Barings Bank collapsing. Famous people who were born in 1995 include models Kendall Jenner and Gigi Hadid, YouTube star Logan Paul, actors Timothy Chalamet, Victoria Pedretti, Nick Robinson, Shameik Moore, football players Patrick Mahomes, Ezekiel Elliott, and Deshaun Watson and Baker Mayfield, basketball players Andrew Wiggins and the Joker Nikola Jokic, and gymnast Gabby Douglas and Michaela Maroney. Famous people who passed away, unfortunately, in 1995 include actors Elizabeth Montgomery, Roxy Roker, Mae Wicks, Dean Martin, Ginger Rogers, Burl Ives, Lana Turner, Donald Pleasance, Ava Gabor, fashion gurus Paolo and Mauricio Gucci, painter Bob Ross, with those nice puffy little clouds, nice puffy clouds, gangster Ronald Cray, serial killer Fred West, British Prime Minister Harold Wilson, Indian Prime Minister Morarji Desai, baseball player Mickey Mantle, writer James Herriot, the man who came up with the polio vaccine, Jonas Salk, matriarch of the Kennedy family, Rose Kennedy, sportscaster Howard Cosell, entrepreneur Orville Redenbacher, and ballet dancer and actor Alexander Godunov. The Nobel Peace Prize for 1995 was shared between Joseph Rotblat from Poland and the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs from Canada for their combined work in trying to eliminate nuclear arms. U.S. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. Brad Pitt was named People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive for the first time. In technology, JavaScript was used for the first time, along with Java 1.0. Windows 95, Alta Vista, and Internet Explorer were released in 1995. eBay started. DVDs were introduced to the public. IBM released the ThinkPad 701C, also first used in 1995, the MQ-1 Predator drone. In video gaming, the first Electronics Entertainment Expo, better known as E3, was held in Los Angeles. BioWare, the game company, started in 1995. The Nintendo Ultra 64, which got a shortened name to the Nintendo 64 console, made its debut at the Nintendo Space World Software Exhibition, while Nintendo announced that it would stop making its NES console in America. The Virtual Boy 32-bit console was sold in Japan, then was discontinued late that year. Also being released that year were the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn consoles. As far as popular games of 1995, there was Command & Conquer, Tekken 2, Twisted Metal, Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, Virtua Fighter 2, Doom, Wolfenstein 3D, Donkey Kong, Panzer Dragoon, Chrono Trigger, NBA Jam Tournament Edition, Mortal Kombat 3, Justice League Task Force, and Judge Dredd. In books, there were bestsellers by John Grisham, Michael Crichton, Daniel Steele, Stephen King, Mary Higgins Clark and the Horse Whisperer by Nicholas Evans. On the nonfiction side, there were bestsellers by General Colin Powell, Howard Stern, Bill Gates, Deepak Chopra, Nelson Mandela, Carl Sagan, Greg Louganis, Charles Kuralt, Ellen DeGeneres, William J. Bennett, Newt Gingrich, O.J. Simpson, who actually wrote about the infamous double murder, and, at that point, Barack Obama. To be fair, though, Obama's book Dreams of My Father wouldn't be a huge seller until about a decade later, once people began to know who he was outside of Chicago politics, since no one knew who Barack Obama was at that point. In movies, Toy Story came out in 1995 and became the biggest movie of the year. Also out in 1995 were Die Hard with a Vengeance, Apollo 13, GoldenEye, the James Bond movie, Tank Girl, Bad Boys, the original one, A Goofy Movie, Friday, Crimson Tide, Pocahontas, Batman Forever, Species, Dangerous Minds, Mortal Kombat, the original, The Usual Suspect, Showgirls, Dead Presidents, Leaving Las Vegas, The American President, Casino, Money Train, Heat, Waiting to Exhale, Judge Dredd with Sylvester Stallone, Seven, Casper, Waterworld, and the original Jumanji with Robin Williams. A lot of good movies came out in 1995. At the Academy Awards, Braveheart won the Oscar for Best Picture. The other winners that year would later face public scrutiny for various reasons. Mira Sorvino in Woody Allen's Mighty Aphrodite and Kevin Spacey in Seven won Best Supporting Actress and Actor, respectively, but both would end up on opposite sides of the hashtag #MeToo movement. Mira was one of the women who helped bring Harvey Weinstein to justice, while Kevin would end up being accused by multiple men multiple times of attempted sexual assault. Nicolas Cage won Best Actor for Leaving Las Vegas, but would lose millions of dollars because of excessive spending. Susan Sarandon, who won Best Actress for Dead Man Walking, would later be taken to task for her political views, while Mel Gibson, who won Best Director for Braveheart, would be chastised in the public eye for various problems, including alcoholism and making racist remarks, among other things. The Postman won Best Movie Score, and Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas by Disney won Best Song. In sports, the San Francisco 49ers won the Super Bowl, which was held for the 95 season in 1996 in Tempe, Arizona. The halftime show was a salute to 30 years of the Super Bowl with Diana Ross. The Nebraska Cornhuskers won the college football championship. In baseball, a players' strike ended after 232 days. The California Angels blew a 13-game lead to the Seattle Mariners in their division. Seattle forced a one-game playoff against the Angels, which the Mariners ended up winning. It became one of the biggest chokes in baseball history, next to virtually every other choke that the Boston Red Sox have ever pulled. Sorry, I actually say that as a Red Sox fan. Eventually, though, the Atlanta Braves ended up winning baseball's World Series. All of that was eclipsed that year by the feel-good sports story of the year, Cal Ripken Jr. breaking Lou Gehrig's consecutive games played streak of 2,130 games played straight. In basketball, the UConn Huskies women's team had an undefeated season and won the NCAA Women's College Basketball Tournament. UCLA, meanwhile, won the NCAA Men's College Basketball Tournament, while the Houston Rockets won the NBA Championship. Michael Jordan would come back to play basketball in March of 1995 after retiring in 1993 to play baseball. Miguel Indurain won the Tour de France. In the Triple Crown races, Thunder Gulch won the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes, but ended up losing the Preakness Stakes, thereby not getting the Triple Crown that year. And the New Jersey Devils won hockey's Stanley Cup. Ben Crenshaw won the Masters golf tournament, but the year was also the first time that the average sports fan probably heard about a kid who won the U.S. Amateur Championship in 1995, Tiger Woods. In other majors, John Daly won the British Open, Corey Pavin won the U.S. Open, and Steve Elkington won the PGA Championship. For the women, Nancy Bowen won the Nabisco Dinah Shore Tournament, Kelly Robbins won the LPGA Championship, Annika Sorenstam won the U.S. Women's Open, and Jenny Lidbach won the Du Maurier Classic. In tennis, Andre Agassi won the Australian Open, Thomas Muster won the French Open, and Pete Sampras won both Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. On the women's side, Steffi Graf won every major tournament except for the Australian Open. That one actually went to Mary Pierce. In auto racing, Jacques Villeneuve won the IndyCar Championship. Jeff Gordon won his first NASCAR Championship, and Michael Schumacher won the Formula One Championship. In television, the History Channel debuted, as did the Golf Channel, ESPN Classic, the Outdoor Life Channel, and Xena Warrior Princess. The O.J. Simpson trial coverage took over everybody's TV screens that year. The top 10 shows for 1995 were ER, Seinfeld, Friends, Caroline in the City, Monday Night Football, The Single Guy, Home Improvement, Boston Common, 60 Minutes, and NYPD Blue. At the Emmy Awards, Frasier won Best Comedy and NYPD Blue won Best Drama. In music, the Beatles' anthology TV documentary aired in 1995, along with the premiere of their first song in over 20 years called Free as a Bird. Michael Jackson released what became the biggest-selling double album of all time worldwide, History. Singer Robbie Williams left the boy band Take That, and Girls, now known as Your Parents probably, lost their ever-loving minds, literally. Artists who were born in 1995 include Kim Taehyung and Jimin of BTS, Megan Thee Stallion, Doja Cat, Melanie Martinez, Lil Uzi Vert, Dua Lipa, Ross Lynch of R5, Post Malone, Queen Naija, Troye Sivan, Jisoo Kim of Blackpink, A Boogie with the Hoodie, Michael Clifford of 5 Seconds of Summer, Kehlani, and Poppy. Lead singer Shannon Hoon of the alternative band Blind Melon passed away from a drug overdose in 1995. Tejano singer Selena was killed. Grateful Dead lead singer Jerry Garcia passed away. Other musical artists who passed away include Melvin Franklin, Rory Gallagher, Eazy-E, Bobby DeBarge, Teresa Tang, Charlie Rich, Phyllis Hyman, Lola Flores, and Nike Ardea. Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill was actually the biggest selling album of 1995, but other big albums released in 1995 were Mariah Carey's Daydream, Queen's Made in Heaven, Shania Twain's The Woman in Me, No Doubt's Tragic Kingdom, Jewel's Pieces of You, the Waiting to Exhale soundtrack, Bruce Springsteen's Greatest Hits, Radiohead's The Bends, Oasis's What's the Story, Morning Glory, Tupac's Me Against the World, Bjork's Post, The Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Coolio's Gangster's Paradise was the best-selling song of the year, followed by TLC's Waterfalls and Creep. Seal's A Kiss from a Rose from the Batman Forever soundtrack. Boyz II Men's On Bended Knee, Real McCoy's Another Night, Mariah Carey's Fantasy, Madonna's Take a Bow, Monica's Don't Take It Personal, and Montel Jordan's This Is How We Do It. Alanis's Jagged Little Pill won Album of the Year at the Grammy Awards for Music of 1995. Also at the Grammys, Seal's Kiss from a Rose won Record and Song of the Year, while Hootie and the Blowfish won Best New Artist. And at the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Dublin, Ireland, Norway ended up winning for the song Nocturne. At the Tony Awards, Sunset Boulevard won Best Musical and Showboat won Best Revival of a Musical. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened its museum in Cleveland, Ohio in 1995, and at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony, music journalist Paul Ackerman was inducted into the non-performers category. The Orioles were inducted into the Early Influencers category, and in the performers category, the Hall inducted the Allman Brothers Band, Frank Zappa, Led Zeppelin, Martha and the Vandellas, Janis Joplin, Neil Young, and this next artist. There was a time when the Reverend Al Green was simply known as Al Green. He's number 65 on Rolling Stone magazine's Greatest Artists of All Time list. He started out singing with his group, the Green Brothers, which included his sister, during high school. He was kicked out of his house and had to fend for himself when his extremely religious father caught him listening to secular music, specifically Jackie Wilson. Still in high school, Al went to live with a prostitute. Al also started another group called Al Green and the Creations. It was through that group that he was noticed by Memphis record producer Willie Mitchell, who signed him to a recording contract. Al found early success with his first breakthrough record in 1969. From there, Al went on a roll. He had now classic hits from the late 1960s to mid-1970s, such as Let's Stay Together, Tired of Being Alone, Love and Happiness, Take Me to the River, and I'm Still in Love with You. By the early 1970s, Al Green was looked at as the next version of Sam Cooke, and also his idol, Jackie Wilson. He had that vocal style and the sex appeal, and he, like Sam and Jackie, developed a following, especially with his stage shows. There was a sexual attraction with the ladies that actually drove them completely wild, and that is pretty much where his trouble started. Now, if you are yourself born again or changed religions for whatever reason, it may have been a traumatic event that may have pushed you to convert. You probably didn't have quite an event like what happened to Al, though. This incident actually stopped his career cold. You see, there was a lady by the name of Mary Woodson White, and she, like most women of the era, fell in love with Al. Problem: she was still married and had kids. Apparently, that didn't actually stop her from going after Al. One day, she left her husband and kids in New Jersey and drove to Al's show in upstate New York. Somehow, some way, she met Al. One thing led to another, and they became lovers because, hey, it's music, man. Somewhere along the line, though, she either became an ex-girlfriend of his or they were still sort of seeing each other, depending on whose version of the story you're going with, I guess. Be that as it may, on the night of October 18, 1974, when Al got back to his house in Memphis, Tennessee, after flying all night from a concert in San Francisco, California, Mary was there waiting for him. Now, here's where the story gets a little on the weird side. Only 2 people truly know what went down, but here's the gist of the events that evening that we know of. Something prompted Mary to snap. The rumor is that Mary wanted Al to marry her, even though she was still married. Anyway, Al went to take a bath. Sometime during that bath, Mary came into the bathroom with a pot of hot grits. Again, not sure if the grits were made by her or by him before he went to take a bath. Then she poured the boiling hot water onto Al, leaving him with severe burns. Mary then went to Al's bedroom where she found his gun. Not sure how she knew that he had a gun in exactly that spot, but whatever. She took the .38 caliber pistol, pointed it at herself, and killed herself with it. According to some reports, Mary left a note in her purse detailing what she would do, so I guess this wasn't exactly a spur-of-the-moment type of thing. Once Al recovered from his burns, he decided that the event was a sign from God that he had strayed down the path of sin and needed to get back on the right path. After all, she could have easily have just pointed the gun at him and it could have been a murder-suicide. He had technically been born again a year earlier, but now he decided to fully commit. At the height of his soul singing career, he quit singing soul music and started doing gospel music. Not only that, but he also decided to become a priest. He became an ordained minister in 1976. Talk about totally committing. He eventually went back to performing secular soul music, but he still preaches to this day. And now you know what prompted Al Green to become the Reverend Al Green. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that even after his religious conversion, he was accused by his ex-wife, Shirley, who married him after he became a minister, of repeated physical and emotional abuse, including hitting her with a boot after refusing to have sex because she was 5 months pregnant at the time with their child. He admitted to the spousal abuse while under oath during their divorce filing in 1982. The Reverend Al has put out 29 secular and gospel albums combined, 25 compilation albums, and in the 1980s, he won 8 Soul Gospel Performance Grammys. He is a member of the Gospel Music Hall of Fame, and also this one. Presented for induction by singer Natalie Cole, the Reverend Al Green, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, class of 1995. Before we look at the case for inducting someone into the Hall in the upcoming class, let us look at how people get into the Hall to begin with. The criteria for being inducted into the Hall was originally that, quote, artists have to have released their first record 25 years earlier and have created music whose originality, impact, and influence has changed the course of rock and roll, end quote. That interpretation has been updated in recent decades to include music that rock and roll influenced, like reggae, country, and hip-hop, and also the youth culture that music has influenced, and also vice versa. And that, kids, is why hip-hop artists have been inducted into the Hall. The different categories that people can be inducted for are for musical excellence, which is for artists, musicians, songwriters, and producers who have had a dramatic impact on the music, early influencers, artists whose music influenced rock music and youth culture, like, say, the jazz or blues, the Ahmet Ertegun Award, which is named for the famed record executive Ahmet Ertegun and goes to a non-performer who has had an impact on music, like record executives and managers. There's also now a category that inducts songs that have influenced music, like the Troggs' song Wild Thing. Of course, the most popular category is the performers category, which has everyone from Elvis Presley to Tina Turner. The different nominating committees decide who will make the official ballots for that year. Then, ballots are sent to 1,000 musicologists, executives, performers, and other artists and experts. The fans also get a chance to vote, with that vote usually being held on the Hall's website. Then from that, the final inductees are chosen. Now, with all that being said, let's look at making the case for putting an artist into one of the upcoming classes for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This week, we're going to look at the case for putting Steve Winwood into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist. Steve is a legend in music, having started out in some of the most critically hailed groups of the 1960s and 70s. And while his group Traffic was inducted into the Hall in 2004, His other groups, the Spencer Davis Group, Blind Faith, Eric Clapton and the Powerhouse, Ginger Baker's Air Force, and Go, have not been inducted yet, although a good case could be made for a couple of them to be inducted. Since Steve is in the Hall as a member of Traffic, let's deal with Steve's solo career. Although he has 9 solo albums, his 2nd through 6th ones are the meat of his career and the ones that gave him his greatest solo success. Those albums all hit the top 40 in America. Even his self-titled first album went top 40, although there weren't any singles that were popular during its initial run. 3 of those albums, Arc of a Diver, Back in the High Life, and Roll With It, all hit the top 5, with Roll With It hitting number 1. His compilation album Chronicles, which is what I personally recommend if you want to get your feet wet with them, went top 30. Singles-wise, Steve did extremely well in the 1980s. He had 19 top 40 songs in America. Out of those, 11 went top 10 and 4 went to number 1. He won 2 Grammy Awards and countless other awards. His songs have been covered by numerous artists, especially in EDM. Eric Prince, along with a few other artists, sampled Steve's song Valerie for the EDM classic song Call on Me. Steve even recorded the vocals for Prince's version himself. Higher Love, which was Steve's number 1 Grammy Award-winning smash hit with Chaka Khan, is now a number 1 smash hit for Kygo, with the late great Whitney Houston doing the vocals on that one. As far as Steve's chances for the Hall go, well, he was nominated back in 2003, but he hasn't been nominated since. And that is a shame, considering his track record, and especially considering that he's also one of the most respected songwriters in the business, even to this day. Steve Winwood, to me, deserves to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and this time as a solo artist. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, there is a brand new museum called the Bob Dylan Center. Located at 116 East Reconciliation Way, the museum houses lyric sheets, photographs, and other assorted items that celebrate the life and career of the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winner. Now, you may ask yourself, why Tulsa? Well, back in 2016, Dylan sold his personal collection of memorabilia to the George Kaiser Family Foundation and also to the University of Tulsa. The Family Foundation also runs the Woody Guthrie Center, which is also in Tulsa. Both centers are located in Tulsa's Arts District, with the Dylan Center being located at 116 Reconciliation Way. You can go visit the museum's archives, but there is a catch. First one, you have to do it by appointment. Second one, and most importantly for most people, you also have to have a legitimate research project. You can't just be a fan. And the research project is something along the lines of you're writing a book about Dylan or you're doing a music documentary about Dylan. Something along those lines. The museum is open Wednesday to Sunday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Admission is $12 for adults. Veterans, seniors, and college students with ID are $10. Children 17 and under, school teachers, and museum members get in free. They also have a deal with the aforementioned Woody Guthrie Center where you can get admission to both museums for a mere $20. You can go to their website, bobdylancenter.com, for tickets along with the COVID rules and regulations, because that's the way things go these days. Bob Dylan actually came into the world first as Robert Zimmerman and grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. From an early age, he was, like most kids, interested in music, so he picked up a guitar. His initial inspiration was actually Chuck Berry. In fact, at a high school gig, Dylan was so loud that the principal cut off the mic. Dylan went to college but continued to play, and when he decided to relocate, he went east to New York City. and it was there that he found his calling and made his mark, first acoustically and then electrically. He met his biggest idol, Woody Guthrie, while he was there. He also played a bunch of clubs and fell in with a bunch of performers who would later become famous in their own right, such as the Clancy Brothers and Tommy Makem. Dylan's songs later became poetic legends about social injustice and the Vietnam War. Once he got his recording contract, there was no stopping him. He became a symbol of the American counterculture movement and dragged folk music into the mainstream. He is now an icon with multiple Grammy Awards, a Pulitzer Prize, and even a Nobel Prize for Literature for his songwriting. In fact, he is known as one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Before Dylan was an icon, though, he made this album. Dylan's self-titled debut album didn't actually do too well. In fact, it only sold 5,000 copies initially, which was just enough for the album to break even, so at least he didn't lose his record deal with Columbia Records at the time. On that album, he only had 2 original songs and did cover songs for the rest of it. On his second album, he wanted to write most of the songs. He had gotten quite political during this time due to his girlfriend at the time, Suze Rotolo, who he had moved in with. He wrote a lot about the war and civil rights for this album. He put power to folk music with words that were both poetic and biting. He recorded the album in 1 year, between April 1962 to April 1963. It was begun in New York City and then to London for a time before being finished back in New York. And it was towards the end of the New York recording sessions that his infamous incident on the Ed Sullivan Show took place when he walked off the stage because the show wouldn't let him perform one of his songs. The legendary John Hammond, who produced his first album and also got Dylan his record deal, didn't produce the second album because of problems between himself and Dylan's manager at the time, Albert Grossman. The album was released on May 27, 1963, and was a hit. It went to number 22 on the Billboard charts and even better overseas. It definitely did much better than his self-titled first album. This masterpiece album was the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. Freewheelin' had the now classic songs Masters of War, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and Blowin' in the Wind. The album itself is in the Library of Congress's National Recording Registry, which is an extremely high honor. Bob is also famous for another event, an event that was so destructive to the sanctity of life itself that it is still talked about to this very day. Women still cry about it. Men with long hair still smoke joints before telling the dark, twisted tale of how Bob Dylan went electric on July 26, 1965 at the Newport Folk Festival. Seriously, people, this was a huge deal back then, at least to the folk crowd. I'll explain. Back in the early to mid-60s, Bob was huge. I'm not sure how to describe it in today's terms because there's no one really quite like him these days. That's probably why he's still so revered. In the 60s, folk music became all the rage. The group The Byrds kind of kicked it into the mainstream when their cover version of Dylan's song Mr. Tambourine Man broke through, but by then, Dylan was already the king of folk music. That was helped in no small part to his performance at the Newport Folk Festival in 1964. He was introduced then by Ronnie Gilbert of the Weavers, who said, quote, "And here he is, take him, you know him, he's yours," end quote. Folk people apparently took that to heart. To them, Dylan was the Pied Piper. By the 1965 Folk Festival, the crowd that proclaimed him as theirs was ready for their Lord and Savior to return. What his crowd didn't realize was that by that time, Dylan was going in a completely different direction. Only months earlier, he decided not to go with an acoustic sound and instead embraced the electric guitar. He recorded the now classic song Like a Rolling Stone only months earlier and released it only 5 days before his appearance at the festival, so the crowd wasn't really ready for his new sound. So, how would they react? Well, not well. In fact, hate doesn't even begin to describe their reaction. Bob went on stage, plugged in his guitar, and went into an electric version of his acoustic hit, Maggie's Farm. The crowd went wild, and by wild I mean they booed, screamed, and said some really not nice things to him. One guy even famously called him Judas, to which Bob retorted, quote, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." End quote. Dylan was actually shocked by the reaction, but his decision was final and his mind was made up. He continued playing and recording with the electric guitar and continued with his vision. It's not clear if his crowd ever forgave him for changing his style, but really it didn't matter. So yeah, kids, Dylan going electric really was a big deal back then, and he did it at the Newport Folk Festival on July 25th, 1965. But after that, Bob released classic albums Highway 61 Revisited and Blonde on Blonde, and then he got into a serious motorcycle accident in 1966, which put him into such a funk that he went into seclusion to recover, both mentally and physically. He went back to touring in 1974, became a Christian, and put out more award-winning albums, and is still at it to this very day. And you can check out Dylan's memorabilia at the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that is it for the Music Halls of Fame podcast, episode 33. Thanks for listening. Audio engineering and editing, video editing, writing, narration, basically everything having to do with this podcast is done by yours truly. You can find us on our website at cjbtproductions.com. Our podcast is on all of your favorite podcast providers such as Apple Music, Google Podcasts, CastBox, Spotify, etc., all under Music History Today. If you would like to support this podcast, our Patreon can be found at patreon.com/Music History Today. We are also on Twitter at Music History Day, and you can now find us on YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell anytime you want to know exactly what videos are dropped and when. All of those links can be found in the show notes below. Thank you very, very much for listening.